I'm not unthankful for the water, but I just don't get it. You say that forage is what they need. Water is not what they need. But you bring in water and not forage. Good morning. Welcome to a remote morning cup of cow shit. As you may have heard, the Reyes National Park Service finally brought some water out to the elk. Here's why that's not as great as it sounds. And don't get me wrong, I'm grateful that there's water out there, but there are huge issues with this. First and foremost is the fact that the Park Service has insisted over years that lack of water is not the problem. They insisted this right up until they brought out water. And unless they changed their website this morning, it still says that the elk aren't facing a lack of water. So you can go multiple directions from here dissecting why there's a problem. Number one, does the Park Service not believe their own website? Do they not believe what they've been telling the public and they're just providing water because they've gotten so much pressure that they finally decided to do it? And that's a problem for reasons we'll get into. Or are they admitting that lack of water is a problem while still not admitting that lack of water is a problem? But most importantly, if this is a compassion move, as now it's being portrayed to the public as, well, why didn't they provide to the elk what they've always said was the reason the elk were dying? Because they have insisted it is not a lack of water. It was a lack of good forage. It was a lack of nutrition. It was lack of minerals. And if that is the case, if that's what they truly believe, and they are taking this action now to help the elk, why aren't they providing the elk with what they say the elk are lacking? But really what's most condemning about this action is that going all the way back to the previous drought and the articles and the public statements they made in 2015, back when 254 elk were allowed to die. This time around it was 150 some. They told activists that they were looking into a contingency plan and looking into bringing in water after they got pressured enough. And then when they continued to get pressured, they said, well, the elk management plan says hands off. We can't help the elk even if we wanted to, because it's not part of the management plan. They're supposed to die off. They're supposed to die off because of what we have decided the carry capacity is. So where's that elk management plan now? So you are now defying the management plan that you once said bound your hands from taking action? What that really means is that you could have taken merciful action all those times instead of allowing 254 to die and then this time around 152 or something like that to die. People need to understand that 254 elk don't die on, October 15th, 2016, or November of 2021. They are slowly suffering and withering away in horrific conditions. And these are the total tally numbers. I'm not going to say once that suffering is done, because the suffering is ongoing. There are animals out there struggling to survive. Those are just when they conduct the census. So what's the problem with putting all the water down at the south end? Well, according to the elk management plan and the studies that were conducted going along with the creation of that elk management plan, these elk have home ranges that they stick to. All the elk don't just share Tomales Point equally. They have subherds and they stick to home ranges. That means that not all the elk come together peacefully, harmoniously to drink from the same watering hole, or in this case, come all the way to the south end to drink from water troughs that are annoyingly close to human beings in car traffic. Some people who haven't looked into this issue deeply will hike out to the far end of Tomales Point and see that muddy, disgusting north pond that manages to keep a little bit of water in it and say, look, there's water out there, problem solved. You know, and you are not thinking about this from the perspective of wildlife. You are not thinking about this from the perspective of all of Tomales Point is there, and there's one pond toward the tip of it that still has some water in it, and you just think that that is like the community pool. Not to mention that that community pool is disgusting. You know, the autopsies that the Park Service released talked about infections inside of the elk, as well as the malnutrition. Well, I can't imagine that drinking scummy, disgusting, algae-filled water that just sits stagnantly in the hot sun without any rain to refresh it. I can't imagine that that has any negative impact on an animal system when that's all the water that it has to choose from. But in addition to that, the fact that there is a pond at the north end, listen to me closely, people, does not mean all the elk in the park use that pond. Someone else said, well, I didn't see any fences while I was out there hiking. It was the 8-foot tall one that you pass on your way into the reserve. The 8-foot tall one that forces those animals to stay in Tomales Point, which is nutritionally deficient, has poor forage, is dry as hell, missing adequate, healthy water sources, and prevents them from doing what they would naturally do, which is travel far and long ranges along the coast in order to find nutrition and find new mates. Instead, these elk are forced to stay in their own tiny little population and die off, and then the ones that remain continue to mate with each other, which continues to diminish the genetic viability of that herd. Which, by the way, the elk management plan's goal literally says what they want to accomplish is maintaining the minimal genetic viability. That's the goal, to reach the minimum. That's nice that that's what our Park Service wants for these animals. You know, maybe we can keep them at that minimum. All right, so quick update. I just went and looked at the NPS website, and they do, in fact, as of right now, still say that the elk have adequate water and that the elk have not died of a lack of water, even though they brought in water. Which raises the question, what's the real reason they brought in the water? And I mean, you can't claim it's them doing their due diligence when they are simultaneously saying this is not what's necessary. And you know, they do mention that this could be the worst drought on record, but prior to this one, the drought where they didn't take any action and let all of these elk die was the worst one on record, or maybe there was one worse in the 70s. So they didn't take action then. They haven't taken action over the years. What's the real reason they took action now? It's not because of the goodness of their hearts. Clearly, they're hearing the pressure, and the world is waking up to how poorly managed this park is, and they're probably getting sense on the wind of getting sued for their incredible negligence. Now, I went on to read, because I was thinking, well, maybe they intend to bring out the forage, because I said earlier, it's pretty weird that they do say, in their own words, they do say that they think that the reason they're dying is lack of good forage. So again, if the goal is to help the elk, why didn't they bring in what they say the elk need? And their website, as of today, says they do not plan to bring in forage. I'm not unthankful for the water, but I just don't get it. You say that forage is what they need. Water is not what they need. But you bring in water and not forage. It doesn't seem like the actual goal here is to help the elk, but just to appease the public. And I don't know, that gets tricky, because it's like, well, they should appease the public, because in my opinion, the public are correct in this matter, but they also shouldn't bend to this extent just because of public pressure if they were in fact correct. But they aren't correct. And I think that's what's kind of being admitted without them admitting it. I'm just reading more of their fact statements, continuing to insist that lack of water was never determined an issue, and according to them still isn't determined an issue. I just want to make sure everyone understands that the park saying the elk had sufficient water was during the time that 254 elk died, and again when 152 elk died. Now, some of us went out and went through great lengths to go and show what these water sources actually looked like. And no. If you'd been out there with us, you would have been appalled at what the Park Service is calling sufficient water sources. But again, if they insist that it's not a water issue, why didn't they take the route of providing what they do think the issue is? If you think the elk should die as a natural occurrence while stuck inside of a zoo, unable to find forage or water, that's natural according to the NPS. They said normal and expected, this most recent die-off. They said that, normal and expected. Okay, so if you're gonna be that calloused and standoffish with the death of these animals, why, you know, it's not that I don't appreciate the water, but what is your stance? You think it's cool for these animals to die the way that they're dying, or you don't? Now, last but not least, I mentioned how a couple of us went out and went through great lengths to verify the claimed water sources that appear on the water source map that the Park Service published to the public. That map came out in September of 2020, and it was BS. All those blue dots and lines on there should be brown dots and blue lines. But the reason that I bring this up is on their fact and in emails to elk advocates, the Park Service again said that they have just recently monitored and updated the map accordingly. The reason I bring this up is that the Park Service has, again, in their fact and in emails to advocates, stated that they have gone out and surveyed the area and updated their map. It's the same map. What kind of an update is that? And is the water really exactly the same as it was? I mean, that's not an updated map, which begs the question, are you even going out and surveying? I mean, if your updated map is a lie, then why isn't the sentence before that claiming how you updated the unupdated map not also a lie? And they did this in 2020 as well. One of the elk advocates asked if there had been an update regarding the water sources. And they wrote back saying, yeah, we just had our elk people out last week surveying the water and we updated the map. This elk advocate asked, oh, could I please see the updated map? It was the same map again. Like, and I did an episode on this. I don't know if people aren't watching or just don't care, but the Park Service is lying to you. We pay their salaries as federal employees, and they lie to us in return. And just because they decided to include this in their updated FAQ, the ramps for animals to escape from the troughs, again, let's go and check all the ranching troughs and see if those have escape ramps, and then calculate how many animals drown in ranch troughs every year.